Welcome to the Rejuvenating Healers Show. Again, we are back, an educational platform that's exploring both ancient and modern wisdom, creating a bridge of the two so that we can collectively develop health systems that support our entire community as a whole. Hi, Charlie. Look at your
Hi,
background.
Dee.
Wow, it's so good to be on the beach with you.
Yes, I know. It's so awesome. We love being here in Hawaii.
That's right.
Woo.
Coming to you from the ancient lands of Hawaii.
Yes.
Um, Cool. So today, today's show is going to be a little different, right?
Yeah, I think it's time we kind of have some hard-hitting questions, right? And really address some of the major issues that we're seeing in healthcare, especially.
Yeah, and I think today we really want to focus on this mass exodus of healthcare providers from the system, meaning physicians, nurses, social workers, respiratory therapists, you name it. Everyone is leaving, especially the nurses. We know. So that'll be really interesting to dive into the problems and then bringing it back to solutions, which is why we're here to really create a space to have those conversations.
Yes, yes. So really excited to kind of dive deep. So I've, in today, like you kind of have to get your information from different places because I feel like how we used to do journalism is kind of dead and I think that people have started to become the journalists rather than we have authorities on people, gathering information just because it's hard to trust our sources when they come from, well manicured and information. So for me, I know there's a lot of controversy with TikTok right now, but just like with Twitter too, what's really interesting is the social media platforms. They're allowing for people to talk very much on an everyday person level rather than, back in the days, you have to set up all kinds of things to be able to like speak to a broader audience, like on the internet. And today with social media, like I said, TikTok, and I recently jumped on it, even though like, currently the federal government is trying to ban it. But it's really interesting because there's a lot of people there. Now I know there's bots there, just like there's Twitter bots, but what's really interesting is the amount of people who are actually sharing their stories, like
Yeah.
authentic stories. Sure, you can add 20% of exaggeration, but a lot of these people are very honest about what's going on. And so,
Yeah, it's
what's really
interesting that you bring that up, Charlie, and it'll be fun to share like a couple stories with you about how during the pandemic there was backlash of nurses who were sharing what was going on their social media, and I definitely would love to share that with you all because so even with that, we're seeing with this potential ramification, we're seeing an increase in people sharing the stories just because the stories need to be heard, you
right.
know. Hmm.
And we have to really pay attention to why we're doing this too, right? Because I think as a people we've been kind of censored in all kinds of way, and I
Right.
think in this past pandemic I think people were put to the brink of burnout, right, as we're going to talk about, and just many factors of reasons why people decided to leave. So I like to actually I did some investigative research on TikTok. Not
Great.
really, I just
So
searched.
today's kind of be like almost you interviewing me and kind of and then so that I can share what
Right.
my experience has been and what I've witnessed and some kind of anonymous stories that I'm familiar with, right?
Yeah, because this is also your story too, because you also
Yeah.
left during that time. And so we're kind of
Yeah.
seeing people also who also left and are leaving right now. And then we can walk through your story of like what were some factors that really affected your decisions.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Okay, great.
so we're going to do some little sharing here of TikTok videos. So real quick, this one is just I'm just scrolling through, and you could just to show everybody that like I'm just looking for healthcare workers leaving healthcare, and you can see here
Wow.
2022. Now I scroll some of these, so we're not looking through them all like the whole thing. So I just wanted to see how many. Some of these 5 days ago,
Wow.
2023.
Yeah. What's interesting too about this Definitely curious to so I follow all, I see all these, and all my nurse friends, a lot of us follow these accounts, and it's somewhat of an outlet, I guess, if you're not sharing your story, to see it
Mhm.
reflected in someone else. And so this common theme that comes up with respect to nurses, um, is this kind of this helplessness and also inability to support your patients, and because of limited resources, whether it's staff, whether it's supplies, and constantly just being stretched to the limit, like a rubber band. And so, yeah, there's a lot there. Sorry, did you want to play one? If you
No,
want to
no.
play one, please.
I mean, yeah. So that's kind of like the
Maybe,
list, right? Of you
yeah,
see,
there's
it's
a
also
lot.
not just nurses. We're seeing actually doctors, right? There was
Mhm.
one on here that it was a she was a surgeon. She became a surgeon, but 2 years later, she said like, "Hey, I ran into too much mental health, and now I'm choosing to leave. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like," she says, "I'm choosing to leave to heal." Right. So
Yes.
what's happening is, why are we as healthcare professionals trying to help people get better, that we're also falling into the trap of getting sick from actually doing our job, right?
Yeah, and what's interesting is I've seen this kind of shift over the last couple of years with this content, because burnout, so say like working 16 hours, not getting a break to go to the bathroom, missing your lunch, these things, they were creating content around this on social media, and people are like kind of like, oh, haha, yeah, that's true, that's my life, oh, haha, almost kind of like wearing it as a badge of honor, and this is maybe a little bit before COVID. And then you've seen this shift as these stories are coming forward, and kind of this more like, this different approach as to, oh, wait, actually, this is not normal. We've normalized it. Um, so it's been really kind of nice to see that shift, at least in awareness, as like, this, we can no longer silently sit back and watch this happen to the people who are caring for our communities.
Right. I feel like the system has already been kind of like leaking at the seams, right? And
Yes.
I think with COVID and the pandemic, I feel like it just pushed the system to the brink of starting to fall apart, because so many new protocols had to be implemented, and you
And they were
saw,
changing,
yeah,
every day. So it was kind of like nobody knew what they were doing. It was like the blind leading the blind, and anything that was common sense was just thrown out the window. I mean, there was a point where the CDC had released a document that said, if you don't have a mask, because this is when we had a PPE shortage at the beginning of COVID, right? If you don't have a mask, for nurses to just basically wear a bandana around their face. And it was kind of like, so you start to question all of these things and start to realize, like, what are we doing? But you're right, it really just amplified an already strained and strangulated system, um, that just continues to really lose good people. So it's the public health crisis of our time, in my opinion.
yeah, no, it's really interesting. And so I have actually two videos. One of them has her, so it's a different one than just burnout, because I think burnout is a common one. And I think definitely we can do a lot for that. I think administrators need to be a bit more aware, but I think understanding where administrators coming from, right? So this video is very interesting because she's actually saying it from that perspective.
Okay, cool. Let's hear
I
it.
think it's this one. So let's see.
I think the main reason why so many of us are so upset, frustrated, exhausted to the point of wanting to leave our roles in healthcare, doesn't matter what you're doing right now in healthcare, many of us want to escape that. And that would even mean just leaving healthcare entirely. And that's very sad. Uh, Hospitals are not focusing on retention. They've had 2 years almost to focus on retention, to address these staffing shortages, to make changes to keep core staff, retain staff, instead of watching them leave in droves and then regretting their decision making months later. like businesses. So they are worried about short term. They are worried about what is happening fiscally each quarter. How are we doing fiscally this quarter? And by we mean the system, not how are these nurses, healthcare workers, how is our staff doing emotionally, physically? They're crying out to us for help. No, we want to know how we're doing fiscally. From the beginning, these hospitals have done what they've needed to do to recover fiscally as best they can for each quarter. If that means furloughing nurses in the beginning of an unknown pandemic where we may need staff in a year, that's what they did. Same for staff who are already embarrassed and disgusted by our actions, so be it. Because at the end of the day, the bottom line is being met and we are making money.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, she really nailed it. Hit the nail on the head on a bunch of different issues, and that has been the great awakening for me as a nurse, and part of my decision to leave the bedside as a hospital nurse. I was in the pediatric intensive care unit for 7.5 years, and yeah, and also my role as a leader in the union really provided me with an insight to a lot of things behind the scenes, working directly with human resources and administrators, and being on the bargaining team, sitting across the table with these administrators, and what the bottom dollar that was always speaking, and so it's been pretty disheartening to see that escalate quite a bit, and yeah, I think we're all feeling it.
Do you have any kind of specific details on like what were some of these concessions that were being made so that, the bottom line were being met?
Well, I mean, this is pre-COVID in 2018, for example, when we went to the table for negotiations, things that the things that were on the table from the side of the hospital that they were trying to take away were cuts to our pension plan. Same wages was always an issue. Like they weren't competitive with the standard in the area. When cost of living continues to rise, and everyone has student loans and families and mouths to feed, and this is in California, right? So pension, healthcare, um, education was a huge one, that there was always cuts to education. And so I think a lot of nurses had shared with me, they're feeling the stagnation, not being challenged and learning more so that they could, show up for their patients and also feel like they're contributing and growing. So that was before COVID. Staffing has always been an issue. And with COVID, I
And
saw
before
them.
COVID, were you noticing, was it hard to get a lot of healthcare professionals behind you guys kind of like fighting your fight? Or were you finding like people just didn't believe that everybody was going through that? Or were people just
Oh
didn't care?
yeah. I think it was like there's a couple things. The first is that I'll speak specifically to nursing because that's what I know. And also, I'm not a physician, but I worked side by side in teams of physicians for a very long time. And I think that there is, when it comes to dealing with people's health, and you're dealing with the people who, in life, right? When you're in that industry, it's easy to manipulate people, workers, I'm saying, like the nursing staff, doctors, and it's really easy to manipulate people and continue to squeeze because you're talking about someone's life, right? So it's like, okay, oh, I don't have a nurse coming in. Can you stay over? Can you stay over another 4 hours every day? Every day,
Like a
getting
guilt trip
extension.
almost,
Yes.
right? They
And then
know
it's
that
like,
you guys care.
yeah, and it was like rather again than fixing, like she said, the problem of retaining staff and hiring, and they're not for any like lack of efforts. I mean, I will say our direct managers, they were doing what they can because they felt the brunt of it. They would be called in for staffing and have to take a patient if there wasn't staff, and I really felt for them. And that was actually against our contract as well, right? the contract was not supposed to allow for management and staffing unless it was an emergency, and that was happening on the daily then through COVID. Um, the staffing got so bad that we were turning away critically ill patients. So we had like a record amount of patient turnaways because we just didn't have staff. And so this is again in the ICU where these kids, and a children's ICU, this is a children's hospital, so we have all the specialties and resources. So if a child that needs this endocrinologist is turned away because not because there's no beds, there's plenty of beds, there's just no staff. There's no shortage of beds, and I'm talking pediatrics. This was I don't work in an adult hospital, so I can't speak to that, but we always had empty beds most of the time, and we didn't have staff. And so that was the ongoing cycle. And I knew a nurse who was actually, she was a nurse practitioner. She is a nurse practitioner. She was let go in COVID because she was working in a specialty clinic. And so they started to let a bunch of nurses go. And that was also coming to the union. So we were trying to see how we could get their jobs back, or, and so we're fighting constantly with that because that was happening.
What was the reason why they were getting fired or let go?
They were let go. The reason was that they weren't needed anymore. They were trying to save money. And so now where are those patients going to get seen?
Wow.
And yeah, so this is what we were dealing with through COVID, in addition to not having PPE, and in addition to policies changing every day, and it just continued to escalate, and it hasn't gotten better. It's actually gotten worse. So
now, how are you guys actually managed in terms of, is it just through medical bills that at least your hospital, if you know anything about your hospital, or was there like government help to support things?
Oh yeah, like they received government funding.
Okay.
They received donations. They received, and then they also charged, insurance companies, as well as getting, the coverage of Medicaid, so Medi-Cal recipients too. So there is no shortage of money. There was never the case. There was at all. And this is like from the horse's mouth. I mean, I was in meetings with administrators, and they would find money for things that mattered for them. And again, it's just interesting because I guess I want to be clear that like administrators are also people too. And I had some good relationships with a couple of them specifically who both ended up leaving, because it just wasn't aligned, and they had decided to do other things. But they worked really hard to try to do things to support staff, but it's not up to them at the end of the day, So it is this, when you have this like hierarchical, the pyramid, it's the trickle down system, the same in that setting. And
so it was kind of like run like a corporation. In that hierarchy structure that I think everybody experiences today in big corporate anything, right?
Well, and also in healthcare, there's a lot of hierarchy because you have the dynamic of doctors who have big egos, many of them. And then you have nurses who are doing most of the work, like the actual physical hands-on work, and they're with the patients. And then you have support staff as well, who is also doing all the brunt work alongside, nursing staff. And so there's a lot of ego and a lot of in that dynamic, especially like nurse physician dynamic. And I think I did, not all the time, there's, some special doctors that come through that actually really recognize, like, I got to listen to this nurse. Like, I got to be good with the nurses, because if I'm not, I'm screwed, And so there was that dynamic. And so with that, there's a lot of self-censorship that happens among nurses. I saw a lot of that a lot of fear of speaking up, a lot of to managers, to the doctor, to whoever, and just so constantly feeling like you're silenced in a way. And when you do speak up, you're not really heard or recognized or valued. So there's a lot of those kind of fucked up dynamics just in healthcare in general. And then you add this compounding layer of like no support staff, no resources, working all the time, not taking care of yourself. It's just a recipe for disaster, which is what we're seeing, right? Suicide among physicians is the highest in any profession.
Wow.
I've, have like nurse
I mean,
calls.
that's very interesting that, if you were to have ways to reflect society's happiness, that you got your healers that are choosing to leave not just their jobs, but life,
Yeah,
and that's a very, very, this should be a very big red flag in our, culture that, we're
big
not
time.
necessarily paying attention to.
Yeah, big time.
So
Yeah.
I like to also say, because I think COVID was interesting because technically it was a modern day, pandemic. That means that we had never supposedly seen it in our lifetime, and that's why all these protocols were being set up during supposedly an unprecedented time. However, I feel just like how the fiscal aspect of the hospital was already there before COVID, and COVID just kind of blew that wide open. I think I'd like to also discuss something that may be a little bit controversial in the space, but it's really important to have this conversation. It's misdiagnosis, or even having actually nurses who are saying, hey, there's more to this diagnosis, and maybe like you're going back to ego, right? But I think I wanted to show you this last video that I thought, as I was going through everything, burnout and everything else we looked at, very common. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
like I'm not getting anything new here. She said something super interesting that I hadn't thought about, that I wanted your opinion on. So
Yeah.
because I think this is a lot more prevalent than we are led to believe. And so, that's why I really enjoy kind of like searching for like just regular people's opinion, because they have very interesting point of views.
This reveals why so many people are leaving healthcare. I facilitate 2 weekly anonymous online support groups for healthcare workers, and the resounding theme that is forcing people away from the bedside and from clinical settings and roles is because people feel like they are contributing to a cycle of harm. Healthcare workers are tired of seeing the impacts of unsafe work conditions, and institutions putting profits over patients also feel like they are contributing to a cycle of harm, which if you do work in healthcare for a myriad of reasons, you most likely are contributing to a cycle of harm. That realization is what is pushing so many of us out of this field. There is no way you can pay someone to take away their dignity every time they come in, or expose them to ethical and moral dilemmas over and over again. Full level of support and seeing the impacts of a very broken healthcare system on patients. It's not worth it.
So I thought her story was really interesting because she's coming from an actual group, basically a group therapist for people who are going, groups of people who are going through the same problem you're having. So yeah, she talked about the fiscal conversation again, but what was really interesting is the idea of the cycle of harm, right? I think everybody has said different versions of that. I think we've been placed in like oh shit boxes for it. We've been kind of created as outliers because we were just too far into kind of like our world. So I thought it was really interesting for us to have this deeper conversation about the cycle of harm.
Yeah, I think that is a really powerful statement. I 100% agree. And I will say that despite what department you work in, I mean, we could put this into two kind of categories, like emergency medicine and everything else, right? Like everything else, which is kind of deals with, chronic
General
illness
doctors.
and just general,
Yeah.
yeah, or even other specialties, right? Which can be helpful, but at the end of the day, like, so for example, even if I completely disagree with the way that we treat humans and life and ignore the whole body mind spirit connection, and that's like I can see that that also, even particularly in just that field, like where you're working with and with a cardiologist or kind of these other specialties, you would see it would kind of make sense if you are starting to become aware of this mind body connection, that there becomes a conflict, like an internal conflict, as like, where are the options for people? And so I definitely found that within my space, even as an ICU nurse for kids, right? A trauma center, right? So major accidents. I mean, we had everything, but I loved those trauma patients because it was like that was life-saving and really amazing. And even then, when I was in fully alignment of like what I was doing, like I believe in this, like this, this is what modern medicine is made to do, right? This is why we're here. I still felt conflicted about perpetuating the cycle of harm, given that I did not have the resources in terms of whether it was being able to get in touch with a social worker to come and help support my patient's family, because I needed to be the nurse because I have this patient on like 15 drips, and who is like has a bolt in their brain and has, that I'm monitoring all of these things. I can't be the social worker either. And so, that's one example that which happened quite a bit. That's one thing. Or, or not having the resources to just feel like you can give them options outside of what's being offered, and feeling very powerless. And then having to actually implement interventions. And this is what she touches on, this moral injury, ethical dilemmas. So prolonged, like, who knows, maybe, I don't know what the situation is. I could give you an example in my career where we had, we were extending life, past this point of, and there's many layers to that, right? Because we're dealing with family dynamics. This is also a child. We're dealing with the laws and how what's legal in terms of withdrawing care and all of these things. There was a lot of moral dilemma caused not just for me, but nurse wide. We because being in an ICU, that was part of the practice. Part of the dynamic there was dealing with a lot of death. And so when you're dealing with death and dealing with life and living and these complex things, and you're not allowed to, you're just given these like very minuscule band-aid approach interventions, you want to call them, or tools to offer people, or medications that can, and you're waking up to this greater reality of the mind body connection and how we are making people sick. That is very difficult to come to work with, like your heart, when you're doing that, and if you even do feel like you're contributing to potentially someone's pain, or suffering, and not bringing, I mean, we got into this work as nurses and doctors and whoever's in any sort of caregiving. I can guarantee that most people got into this work because they want to help people and support people. And with the limitations of our current system, it doesn't allow us to do that and to fully show up in that essence with our hearts. And so we do keep showing up, given, like, holding on to that. And that's where you do find this kind of cumulative effect of moral injury, which I recommend everybody. We can do a whole episode on moral injury. So they see it. There's studies done on it in the military, healthcare workers. So it is a real thing. And so I think that was something I definitely experienced 100%, and was kind of like, why am I asking myself, like, why am I doing this when it's not aligned with the way that I want to show up for people in my community? So I think that is a general sentiment, like, especially when you have take a staffing situation, there's no staff coming in, you have to stay extra, you're exhausted, you're just depleting yourself to show up for this patient because you don't want to be the one that's like, I gotta go. But we have to learn to set boundaries too. And that's part of this with work with cultivating self, and what we've been working with the past few years is like, how do we just begin by understanding what we need for our own mental health, physical, spiritual health, and then set those boundaries and hold boundaries if we're continuing to be in situations like that are demanding this of us, you know? So
Yeah,
it's a very real
yeah,
100%. Yeah.
right. I mean, this one is definitely a little tricky because we'd have to get to the nitty-gritty of like what are some specific things that we're doing that is harmful. I think in general we can say the whole system, but then that's a little bit too generalization because there's some things that are done well, and this is where
Right.
we talk about this where in emergency medicine, I think in some places where if the system was done in a way that is for wellness, yeah, in emergency systems you're always going to make sure that there's an option that like saves people,
Yeah,
but
and also
most
giving
people.
people options.
Right, exactly.
And
However, most people are
agency.
not in emergency. Actually, they are put into an emergency situation because of some chronic problem that
Yeah.
they haven't been looked at for very long, right?
Right, right. And we know we can look at studies that measure the majority of cost in healthcare and where that money is going, and it all goes to management of chronic illness and conditions. Um, I mean, it's like what 80% or something. It's so yes, absolutely. And I think that the agency that is taken away from not just patients because of this inability to be truly integrative, it's also removing agency from our healthcare providers. And I think that is what we're finally starting to realize, is that actually that doesn't feel good. And when you start to feel it in your body, that's when you're like, wait a minute, you can't ignore it anymore.
Yeah, it feel like I was imagining when people are experiencing this kind of moral issue with the treatment they're seeing, it's like a game part, just like cracks and dies, and then
Mm,
your constitution to stay in these places is how long it takes for all your heart to like fall apart, and you're like, I have no heart for this job anymore, right? Because this
yeah.
is they're chipping at your ability to stay in your heart space to care for
Yeah.
patients.
100%. And I definitely see it kind of go both ways, where you see, well, actually, there's kind of like three courses. It's like the people who leave, then the people who stick it out and they're wasting away, like mentally fit. They're still showing up and probably doing great because that's like where they're harnessing all their energy and focus. But in their life, they're wasting away relationships to themselves, at just to do that. And then you have the people who double down, and the double downers that are just like, oh, okay, whatever, no big deal, like I'm here to do this, and it is what it is. It is what it
Yeah,
is, and this is just the way we do things, which is, by the way, the most frustrating thing that I hear so many people say. And it's like, no, like, just we've got to do better, and we have to do better for our children. I mean, if you're not going to do it for
yes,
yourself,
yes.
like, come on. you
You know,
know
right, exactly. Because, it's really important that we pay attention to really ourselves, even in the idea of medicine. This week I've had a very, great patient I've been working with. And so he's a young guy, 28 years old, right? So like usually that's not in a range of seeing problems and diseases. But he had MS. He actually had MS, which is basically, if you guys know what MS is, the myelin sheath in the neurons in your brain become eroded. And so what happens is the network, well, being able to send signals to a side of your body becomes slower, right? So that's why that's basically as an athlete, that's very dangerous because now
wow.
your reaction time is gone down quite a bit. However, to an average person, it's not that bad, right? However, it's actually the cascading problem, not the initial lesion in the myelin sheath. And so what was really interesting is I dealt with this patient who basically was given a death sentence for his diagnosis in Western medicine, he was, it looked like he had a stroke. And so we're like,
Mm.
28 stroke, that's weird, and where we're having strokes now with younger age today, it's very, more normalized today. This was actually
Yeah.
a little before COVID. And so he was coming in through COVID, and he basically felt like he wasn't getting any kind of attention in the West. So they decided to go into the alternative space, and he came to our school clinic, and we dealt with MS, not because of MS condition, but what he was experiencing that was affecting his quality of life.
Right.
So basically, half of this right side was becoming numb. That means he was having a hard time walking and moving and really being normal as a person,
Yeah.
right? However, it all stems from the brain, right? And so, yes, we could do some stuff for the brain, but actually, he wasn't able to walk. So we treated his body, not his MS diagnosis. Okay. So he has then a family member, and everybody's like freaking out that he has MS. And so, but then there was another person who had stroke in their family, and he has become basically handicapped. He stays at home and does nothing. He can't move. He's lost a lot of his side of his
Is
body.
this this is a different patient, Charlie, or
Yeah, or his family member.
okay? Oh, his
So
family.
within the family,
Yeah.
they see some both a younger kid, who has MS, and then
Yeah.
it's not
And then
wasn't
the
an
one who had the
older,
stroke. Okay.
yeah, an uncle who had a stroke, right?
Right.
And so everyone was really scared for him because at 20, imagine 28. I mean, being, I'm not saying anything about people can't make it as handicapped, but they told him you have to
Yeah.
learn to readjust to life. Like
Yeah. It's
basically, they
devastating.
said you're not gonna be. They were hinting at you're never gonna be able to walk again,
Right.
right? You're never gonna be able to use the right side of your body, right? But when he came to us, we're like, I don't care what their diagnosis is. We see problems in your body, so we're gonna treat that.
Yeah.
And now he still has the lesion in his brain, but he's walking like a normal person. So
Wow.
most people don't even know he has MS, but he quality of life did not
Mhm.
adjust. Now he lost a few months of work because he literally couldn't walk.
Yeah.
But we basically use acupuncture. So actually, he when we first started with acupuncture, he thought we were doing all the work, so he went back to his natural lifestyle, which is obviously eating unhealthy food because I believe autoimmune is what happened.
Well, and that's also what is not being addressed when he's going to the
Yes,
doctor normally. So what's the
exactly, right. So just
right?
I told him when he came back on the second time, and he like basically said, yeah, like I got sent to the hospital again because I had a second attack. I was like, look, I'm gonna tell you the truth. It's not us that's going to heal you. It's you changing your lifestyle so
Yeah.
that you recognize what you're doing to your body that's causing you to show up to our clinic for us to reset your body, right? Because what we're really
Yeah.
doing is resetting the body. Your body's doing all the healing,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Well, I think that a lot of doctors though, Charlie, but like what I love about your background and studying of Chinese medicine is that this is the foundation of healing that you have been initiated into and have learned that it is this whole system and then you look at like the other side where doctors barely get even like one nutrition class through their medical training, and if that, and they, even though they may know in their intuition when they're seeing their patients that man's got to change his lifestyle, you got to do these things, it's still, they're still not empowered to come with that approach first, or to like lead with that. We're like, hey, let's do these non-invasive things first, and like, let me support you in this, and because that is what's going to sustain your health, whether no matter what medications you take. But they just don't have that foundation, and I think that that's a very that's a huge disservice to them as physicians and the training that they've paid hundreds of thousands of dollars into, and now they're in debt for the rest of their life. And the patients, like all of us, who in our families, so that's, I just really appreciate that, like, you sharing that, because it's a stark contrast in approaches.
Exactly. And really, the reason why people come back to me is because I put them in ownership of their health. I say, I can do the work for you, but you're gonna keep paying me to do the work. If you do the work, you eventually don't have to come here and pay me to do
Yeah.
the work. And I'm in it because I believe in you. I'm not here so I could just sit here and do your problem, fix your problem every
Yeah.
time you
Right.
keep running into it, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
I've had different patients that come in, and the ones who can do the work, they're like, nothing's changing. I'm like, because you're not willing to change yourself. Like,
Yeah.
you're creating the same habit that's causing your problem, and you come to me and say, fix me, right? And this is
Yeah.
fundamentally what we're dealing with is actually a lot of people do not own. And so that's why I feel like there's a lot of suing where you're like, well, you didn't fix me like you promised me, so I'm going to sue you because you didn't do what you're supposed to. And it's like, actually,
Yeah.
if you did the work, you would see major changes, right? And so,
Well, I feel like people are starting to wake up to the fact that, hey, I would like to have more options than taking this pill. And or what if, I mean, in fact, I heard a doctor who was sharing, he's talking about some statistics around the percentage of medical procedures that are completely unnecessary, like when you go into the doctor, whether it's last.
exploratory surgery.
Yeah, and it was like I can't remember. I'll try. I'll find it, and I want to put it in the notes for the show because it's pretty pretty drastic. And he was like, "These are the things that you should ask your doctor." Is like, what happens if I wait? And like he's like, ask that question, and um, what if I don't do it? Kind of a thing. And most of the time, the doctor's like, "Well, then it's okay. You can wait a little while." But there's that just training, that programming of like, boom, here, I did something. Let's get this person on their meds and be done with it. They'll come back, we'll readjust and all of these things. And it just takes a different, it takes a different mindset. And also you have to have the time to sit with patients, which doctors right now don't have. I mean, I recently just heard about, doctors are seeing 35 patients a day in their clinics. There's no way that you can give somebody your full energy and attention all day long for 35 people when we're talking about lifestyle behaviors, but mind, body, spirit. There's If you're doing that, if you want to do that, it's not possible in this system.
Right.
And I think that is also causing, that's part of the moral dilemma among like physicians as well, and them feeling like exhausted from it. I mean, I know my dad is the medical director of a clinic in San Diego, and same thing. He's like, he comes from having a private practice before, where he'd spend hours with one patient. And and he's a specialist at in his clinic, so of course that was necessary, but even so, that's just doesn't happen. So now they are really stretched with what they have to do, and it's pretty much the only way they get funding to stay open. And the whole we just follow the money with all of this stuff. This is what I say, whether it's research, news, education, if we just follow the trail of money, like, you get your answers there. You don't have to worry about, oh, is this true or is this not true? You can figure it out for yourself. And so the incentive structure has to change, and I think that that's when it comes to health, and that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I love for then, kind of like for us to kind of move into more of like your transition, right? Because you experienced something outside of the hospital setting that made you realize that the treatment was not in according to your own moral values now, right? And then eventually you started to do something about it. I mean, you didn't just quit right away. You actually implemented some things, which is the genesis of really cultivating self, and
Yeah.
why we're in the conversation today, 2, 3 years later into
Yeah.
you really having this conviction to say, hey, I see a problem and I'm going to try to be a solution of it rather than just bitch and yell about the same problem that everyone's doing
And
anyway,
just not
right?
continue numbing myself. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Well, which is what was happening, right? And that's initially what led to this, physical, emotional, spiritual collapse that I share, about 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago. And so it was, at that point where I had to really decide if do I want to keep taking do I need these medications? Like they tell me I have to take them the rest of my life. I don't want to take them the rest of my life. Something's off here. Let me try some other things. I just got curious. And I think it was just about getting curious about other ways of managing how I felt and how I was dealing with things, and starting to reevaluate how I take care of myself and treat my body and my spirit, and how I let myself play and actually have fun. And and I really had to take a deep look, and I lost a lot of friends. And at that point, and people were like, what's happened to Dee? Like, she's gone off the deep end, kind of thing. Oh, she's this hippie now. She does yoga, she meditates, all this stuff. But really, like, that journey of titrating myself off of these medications, highly addictive medications that were just getting me. I was a zombie, and I finally was able to kind of feel things again, which is hard. And it's still a journey, because I don't think it's ever over for any of us. But
it's really interesting. Just wanted to mention something, because
yeah,
actually, what you're saying is going back to exactly what's happening with some of these videos that they were saying they were going to a cycle of harm. You were in your own cycle of harm. You
yeah,
were actually also using the same drugs as well. And
yes,
so
yep.
that kind of,
And most of us are like,
yeah.
I mean, if you, again, you can look at statistics around this. Like, most doctors are medicated on something, whether it's antidepressant, something for ADHD, nurses the same. Are we are perpetuating the cycle of harm, not just on our patients, but on ourselves, which I think is even worse, because then you're not even, then how do you become conscious of what you're doing when you are, how can you be aware, how can you be present when you're in that space? And
Because
it's
in that same token,
yeah,
what you were feeling consciously was getting numbed
yeah,
from the pharmaceuticals themselves, right? Because the
mhm,
idea of depression should be a trigger in your life to change your life. But you're like, someone turn off that damn depression feeling. I want it to go away because I don't want to deal with the fact that I'm depressed, and so you chemically
or
change
we're,
yourself.
yeah, because we're told, because it's sold to us as that you have a chemical imbalance, not that something in your life or what you've been through in your life that needs, that you haven't, that has been. What does depression mean? It means you push something down, right? So what are you pushing down in your life
Yeah, yeah.
that is causing that, right? So it is this great, and it requires support. This is why I say that healing happens in community, because it's not, you're not going to go to one doctor and be better forever. We need support. We need to know how to integrate things in our life. We need to know who to go to when things get tough, and we might, because we go back and forth. It's not this like linear journey, it's a spiral. So um I think that yeah. So basically, just to sum it up, I just was like, hey, these things are working for me in my life, whether it's meditation, whether it's yoga, whether it's Tai Chi. These are things, or they're things that I'm interested in learning. So how can we? So that's really what it was about. It was like, these things were working for me. So we started doing the retreats, and then we started sharing workshops in the hospital, and we started then noticing things in the hospital that needed to be fixed. And we're saying, hey, how can we create more of a sacred workspace, especially when we're dealing with death and all these intense dynamics, with children being sick, right? It's and in any hospital. So so that's how it started, was kind of doing things outside of the hospital. And then as we started to get kind of more familiar with and identifying our allies, people who in administration who really wanted to back these initiatives, that's when we just were like, okay, let's do it, and so we were able to do a few things. Maybe you want to pull up the website real quick, Charlie, and share
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So the website's under construction right now, but here's a little bit of how it's evolving to share with you guys. And yeah, and this is kind of the page of what we've done. resilience retreats. These are kind of the private retreats that we would do, mostly nurses, nurse practitioners. We also had some other caregivers that would come, and 1 to 2 days, really beautiful experiences. And we've done some organizational wellness with nonprofits. One of them actually here in Hawaii, who is doing some amazing work with the homeless community. They're doing a lot of street medicine. So that's the organization wellness, continuing education. A lot of that's still in the works. Obviously, there's something there, but just a bunch of the things that we had to pivot on during COVID because we couldn't gather in person anymore, right? So
Yeah.
we shifted to offer a lot of education online, and through the support of our education department at the hospital, we were able to offer CEUs for nurses, which was really great. So that was able to go towards their renewing of their nursing license. So
Nice.
yeah, and we've done some presentations at universities as well, and keynote speeches with Rotary clubs and other groups as well. And I really want to focus here on this regenerative healthcare space. So this was really a powerful initiative that remains today. And this is basically a room that we created in the hospital that was designated just for staff, remains designated just for staff, all staff. You could be a kitchen worker, you could be housekeeping, whatnot. And it's basically just like a mini Zen room. And so there's essential oils, there's tea, there's yoga mats, there's chairs to relax, and it's really just a quiet space. And it's open 24 hours a day. And this really came from this inability of us to have spaces to go, after your patient dies, or after you've just had a really hard shift, or in the middle, your lunch break, because our lunch breaks are a joke. You go into the break room and everyone's talking about work, or like there's no space to turn off this external sensory inputs. So this was one of the things that we did at the hospital. Then they decided they loved what we did and then wanted to do it at the other hospital. So that's I'm not sure if that was completed, but that was in the works when I left as well. And so it's beautiful. I still get selfies from nurses saying thank you for doing this. We love the space. It's my safe haven. So it's really magical. And then here on the left, some of the play shops we did in person. This was a painting play shop. And then we also done some hula hoop dancing, some laughter, a lot of really fun things in person as well. So this is coming along. So you guys are getting the first sneak peek as to what the page is
Yes.
gonna, to just
Excited.
highlight the things that we've done, because we've done so much. Actually, I don't have enough space on that page to share everything that we've done. It's been pretty amazing. So we're really excited, and I think that the next phase for the organization, in addition to continuing to offer these services to hospital facilities or at the university level or in clinic settings or just out in the community, our next phase, what we are moving towards is, and what actually brings me hope around all these problems that we talked about earlier. What brings me hope, because I don't have the answer. No one of us has the answer. And so the only way for us to collectively create the answer and build it and envision it is for us to come together in a regenerative way where we feel good, right? And so this next phase is really creating some regenerative healthcare conference where that's hosted by Cultivating Self and facilitated by a few different facilitators, where we come together and we have these discussions and really envision what does it look like for us? What does the ideal look like for us in terms of a system that is regenerative, not just for us, but for the patients too?
Yeah, what's really great is the idea of being able to repeat what you did when you were frustrated with what was going on in your space, and you're like, hey, instead of being the hippie, I'm just gonna bring that energy into the space itself, and eventually they stop calling you a hippie because they're like, no, it's great actually. And it's really funny, we have to stigmatize the idea
I
of
know.
resting
Of
and people who
resting.
enjoy life as hippies, you know?
I
And so this
know.
idea that normal people work hard and burn out, only hippies get to enjoy life. Well, maybe I want to be a hippie.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. I think that that's a really good point, and definitely, I did see the evolution over the years. A lot of people would come around, hey, I'm interested in, are you doing a retreat? What's going on? People who weren't. So everyone has their time, you know, if it resonates, great. If it's not, that's great. That's okay too. Find something that works for you. This isn't for everyone. And we're okay with that. I'm okay with that. We don't need everybody to sign up for this, but what I will say, what my call to action will be for everyone listening is that you do something to and reevaluate the feeling and how things are working for you in that space. And if it's not working, get curious about why. Really.
And I think the great lesson you were actually bringing up is that you need to find allies. You need to find a community
Yeah.
that's going to help you, right? And so that's why we're offering
And
this
that's what we're doing. Yeah.
conference, right? This conference where we're looking for people like Dee, like myself, who are really excited to be in the healthcare space without following the old rules of healthcare, right? Like where we are revolutionizing what that means. And so the community is the only way we're going to change, right? Because you can see like she could easily have fought against a system and like go and do occupy hospitals, but she's like, no, like the hippie way is to do it like very subtly, right? So
With
you
love.
went in and yeah, and you did it very subtly, and people, you know, experienced it and then shifted, right? And that's what we're trying to do is, you know, what are some experiences that will help us all think of different options. So we were talking about options with healthcare and wellness, but this idea that what if your environment could be, you know, adapted to give yourself healing too, and that's what we did with the regenerative healthcare space. The idea of the retreat, you allowed actually groups of nurses that were working together that probably didn't hang out together, you know,
Yeah.
actually come
To
to a
share.
place and had that, yeah, that bonding, maybe able to like finally talk when you guys had like some kind of drama, you finally talked it out and realized there was no drama. You just were so busy as nurses that maybe you kind of like could squash it because you're in a restorative space and you're like, hey, I don't feel that angry about you, you know, because
Yeah.
maybe the setting was creating that.
Yeah, and administrators, they go to these conferences all the time and they compare what they're doing at hospital and some managers too, right? They get to go and compare what is being done and working and implementing at other hospitals. And maybe that's, you know, on the medical side, but why aren't we doing that with what's working in terms of serving the staff? Maybe there are hospitals that are smaller or maybe more community based that haven't fully, you know, that aren't as awful. You know, there's an extreme. You have like the Kaisers, and then you have like the small community hospitals, and you have the UCs that are up there with the Kaisers. And so, like, how can we learn from each other as well? And doing it at grassroots level where we're really giving people the power back, and we don't need to go through our administrators because we already know the answer.
You know, it's funny. One
We
of
don't
the
need
things
to
that
look to them to tell us what to do.
exactly. So one of the things that we have to do is go through patient communication classes, right? So what's really funny is like there's a book that explained how like we suddenly learned and understood that we had to change some of our questions from clinical centric questions where we're trying to find out what is wrong with the patient to people centric questions, right? It was like a thing. I was like, you guys took how
Yeah.
long to understand that it was people first? So what I'd like to actually propose next is another option. What if we made it healer centric first, right? If the healer is feeling rejuvenated, right, and really feeling healed and at their greatest potential, they're gonna. This is what happens when we see a lot of people when they get healed. All they want to do is share how they got healed, right? Or
Yeah.
people are asking, "How did you get better?" Well, let me tell you about it, you know. And so as nurses, you know, this whole idea of also the wounded healer, a lot of us went into healthcare because we had our own physical ailments that suddenly we learned about it and we're like, hey, why don't we just get paid for actually seeing these
Yeah.
problems?
Right, right. And and I think a lot, I've seen a lot of nurses do that. They're leaving and they're, going, that's what I'm doing, doing coaching other people and supporting other people with what works for me, and being able to give it a different perspective, and because we do need community, right?
Right. But that's the idea too, is like if we actually made it a healer centric community where the healers are focused more on healing, because they're the ones who are learning this information, right?
Right,
And so in that level, if they are feeling taken care of, they're going to naturally want to give the best to their patient, right? And this is
right.
the idea where we say you cannot fill a cup from an empty cup, right?
Yeah, yeah, right. You can't.
Exactly. So this
And it also
idea that
empowers.
we're all running empty, all the cups, right?
Right.
You're saying?
Right. Yes, everybody is pouring from an empty thing.
Cup.
Pitcher.
Yes. Oh, yes.
An
Exactly.
empty thing. But I think also what's powerful about what you're saying is that it is giving the healers back the tools so that they can go back to their workplaces and question what is being done. Because if we're not questioning, then how are we growing? How are we recognizing when things aren't working anymore, right? So I think it's also cultivating this curiosity, and this and finding helping us find our voice again, so that we can feel empowered to ask those questions, because we are informed from that lens of holistic health, and what that actually means, that you can't ignore what's going on in the home, relationships, where people have come through, what they've been through. You just can't, right?
I had a different imagery for like we have the triangle of the hierarchy of people, right? But what if we like made it a little bit fatter and then we kind of did this? And so this idea maybe, what if the administrators are healer centric? Their job is to make sure healer retention is there, right? Because then what happened is the healer's job, and they're naturally good at it, is to take care of the patient.
Right.
Because then if the patient's taken care of, what is the patient going to take care of? The administrators. And that's an actual loop, right? Of,
Mm.
regenerating the community rather than the hierarchy of like the top gets everything, the people on bottom are basically, you need your dues before you can get to the top. But if
Yeah.
you did this circle where it's more, reuse, not recycling, but like keeping the energy within, right? Because when the patients feel great, they'll be like, where do I pay? Who do I pay? Because I feel great, right?
Yeah, make donations or something. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
And so if the administrators saw, like we are saying, be healer centric, where you are making sure that if your healers are in the best shape possible, you're gonna make a ton of money, right?
Yeah, and I think I'll be completely transparent with my vision for health, and what this long-term vision that I have. It completely moves away from any sort of pyramid hierarchy, and there's
Dolphin
no place.
pods.
Right. Yeah, there's no space for that at all.
Yeah.
And I believe that we can offer the best care when we are coming with it as a collective, and where everyone is at the same level. It doesn't matter what education you have, where you come from. That doesn't make you any less able to contribute to a bigger picture of health, or what could work in a system. And this is being done in other places. There's a co-op, and this is kind of this cooperative, like collective model, and also employee ownership, where the employees actually have ownership in the company. And how do you get people to be invested in a community and to stay? Is you give them ownership, and then that's like their baby too, right? It's not like just working for the man. It's actually, oh, this is contributing to my children's, and so on. And so that's what I so in the Netherlands. I don't know if I don't think I finished sharing this, but there's a nurse, there's a co-op in the Netherlands that's completely run by nurses, and they do home health essentially, and they've grown so big. And so it's happened. There's mental health facilities, or like small mental health co-ops, that are doing the same thing, going into sharing a practice, where everything is collective and there isn't a hierarchy. There isn't one person that owns it, and there's not one administrator, and there's no trickle down. Hospital system would be interesting to play with, like what that looks like. I don't know the answer, but I just think that if we empower people with these tools, knowledge, education, and wisdom that they already have within themselves, anything's possible.
Yeah, yeah,
So
that's a great way to kind of conclude our show, right?
close it out.
We're hoping that everybody feel inspired to like not necessarily, fight the system, but rather like what are some ways that we can have a system that works for us, right? Offset it and work together. I think community is a big conversation, and I think being able to understand that everyone needs to be healed. Like the healers should go through the same healing that the patients are going through, and that's how we as a community, will be in the wellness space rather than the sick care space, right?
Well, they have this kind of support for like in the coaching world, like they have all of these people who have these entrepreneurs. They have groups that come together as the coaches and teachers or whatnot, and hold each other accountable, and are saying, hey, what's working for you? This is what I'm struggling with within either myself or with this client that I had or whatnot. Why aren't we doing the same thing for nurses and doctors? That to me. So that's kind of what I envision for this conference, is really building a network of support for change. And so, if you are working in a hospital that you think would benefit from having a regenerative space for staff to be able to go and take time for themselves, that we can share how we did it. We can support that. We can support you in that initiative. We can support you in that process. That's just one example of the many things that we can do. And if whatever ideas you all have is what I'm curious to hear, and how we can support that moving forward to bring the change into your community while we're also coming together and supporting each other for this greater vision.
Yeah,
So
yes.
yes, thanks
So
for the questions, Charlie, and for showing
yes,
us the videos. That was great.
yeah, you did awesome, and I really got to experience kind of your story too, because this is to inspire everyone. So we're hoping that anyone who's coming watching our video, please make sure to subscribe, join us. We'll keep doing these, and we have actually an interview coming up where we're going to interview one of our board members,
Yeah.
and so we're very excited to do that. But we're really here for everybody to build a community. So if you have any questions, please ask us through our chat comments. We'll answer it the next time. But with that, we're very excited to be here for you guys, and let's all rejuvenate together.
Let's do it. And I'm so grateful that that Cultivating Self is sponsoring this show. So shout out to the organization, and so excited to see you guys next time with our very special guest who we will be interviewing. And so sending everybody love, and hope that everybody is taking some time to pause today and reflect on what we can do, maybe one thing that you can do to support your rejuvenation, whether that's going for a walk, whether that's taking a bath, doing some stretching for 5 minutes. What does it look like for you? So I'm curious to hear your answers. So long. Aloha, everyone.
Bye.